Have you ever had a night that was supposed to bring joy, but instead reminded you how alone you truly felt? And then, just when you were certain the world had forgotten you, someone unexpected stepped into your life and changed everything with a single, simple moment. Tonight's story begins on a quiet winter evening inside a small Boston restaurant, where a woman nursing a broken heart crosses paths with a father doing his best to hold his world together, and a little girl whose innocence has the power to reach places adults no longer dare to go. What happened next is not what anyone planned, but sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin when you least expect them. Let's begin. She was rejected on a Christmas blind date, until a little girl asked, "Will you be my new mom?" The first sound that cut through the Christmas night wasn't the music or the laughter or the clinking glassware. It was the tick, tick, tick of the antique clock above the bar at Snowlight Bistro, steady, unforgiving, far too loud for a woman who had already spent 15 minutes pretending her heart wasn't sinking. Elena Ward sat alone at the table by the window, her palms resting on the linen cloth, feeling every tremble in her pulse travel into the fabric. Outside, Boston's snowstorm whispered as flakes brushed the glass, soft, cold, relentless. Inside, violins hummed through the speakers, warm carols wrapped the room like a promise she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. This was supposed to be a new beginning, she reminded herself. Just one chance. One evening. One man who might not run the way the last one did. 3 Christmases ago, she had walked into a different restaurant, same city, same season, same dress color, and walked out with a text message ending her engagement. She still remembered her ex-fiancé's voice message, tight and trembling. "I don't know if I'm ready for forever. I don't know if I want kids. I can't do this." She swallowed hard. Snowlight Bistro smelled of roasted rosemary chicken and cinnamon butter scents she once loved. Tonight, they made her chest tighten like her body was bracing for another blow. A waiter passed behind her, the subtle rush of air brushing her shoulder. Then came a faint hum of conversation, mothers, laughing couples leaning close, children whispering as they pointed at the fireplace. Everyone around her felt wrapped in warmth. Everyone except her. Footsteps approached, slow, crisp, decisive. Elena straightened, smoothing her dress though her hands shook. "He's here. Please, let this be different." "Hi, Elena," a man's voice asked. She lifted her gaze. Marcus Hayes, taller than his profile photos, dressed neatly, carrying the scent of fresh cologne and winter air. For a second, she felt a flicker of hope. That flicker died the moment he looked her over once sharply with something almost like disappointment. He sat, clearing his throat. So he began. "You look nice." Something in his tone carried an invisible but. Elena tried to keep her voice gentle. "I'm glad you made it. I know the roads must be rough tonight." Marcus didn't smile. He leaned back, exhaling. "Listen, I'm just going to be direct. It'll be easier for both of us." A quiet dread slid down her spine. "I think you're great. Successful, polished, confident." He paused, his fingers tapping the table, tap, 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 as if searching for kinder words and settling for none. "But that's kind of the problem." "The problem?" she echoed. "You seem strong. Very strong. And I'm looking for someone more." He rotated his hand, searching for a word that wouldn't punch her in the chest. More traditional. Wife material. Motherly type. You know, the carols in the background swelled, filling the silence he left open cruelly, almost mockingly. He stood before she could speak. "You're wonderful, truly. Just not the right fit for the family I'm trying to build." He gave a polite nod as if rejecting a job applicant. Then he walked away. His chair scraped the floor, sharp final. His cologne drifted behind him, fading like a door closing. Elena sat, frozen breath hitching as the warmth of the restaurant seemed to dim around her. Not again. Please. Not again. She lowered her head quickly, letting her hair curtain her face, but the tears didn't care. One slipped free, then another. The weight of another Christmas disappointment settled on her chest like snow piling on a branch until it bends. She pressed her hands together tightly, trying to steady her breathing. In, out, in, out. The sound of her own breath felt louder than the music. Then came a voice, small, curious, startlingly close. "Excuse me. Miss, why are you crying?" Elena lifted her head, startled. A little girl stood beside the table, no taller than the height of the chair. She wore a velvet dress and held a knitted teddy bear so tight its yarn face looked slightly squished. Her brown curls framed a round face, and her breathing was soft, quick like she'd run to get here. Elena blinked. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm okay." "Really?" The girl frowned with an honesty only children possess. "It doesn't sound like you're okay." Her voice was soft like a bell wrapped in wool, gentle but impossible to ignore. Elena wiped at her cheek, embarrassed. "It's just been a long night." The girl leaned closer, gripping her teddy. The bear's little bell jingled lightly against the table leg. "My name's Daisy, and I don't like when people are sad on Christmas." Elena felt something in her chest loosen just a little. This child, with her tiny voice and earnest concern, had cut through a loneliness no adult had ever managed to touch. "I'll be all right, Daisy," she whispered, forcing a smile. "But thank you for asking." Daisy's eyebrows scrunched together. She stepped even closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret meant only for Elena. "Can I make you happy again?" The question hit Elena with the softness of a whisper and the force of a miracle. Her breath caught, her heart stuttered, and in that suspended moment between a stranger's rejection and a child's compassion, something shifted. A thread of fate tugged, quiet but undeniable. Daisy looked up, eyes wide and sincere, waiting for an answer Elena wasn't sure she could form. Before Elena could speak, Daisy leaned in, her voice barely a breath. "I can make you feel better, if you let me." And just as Elena's lips parted to respond, a deeper voice called from behind the child, "Daisy, sweetheart, you can't just walk up to guests like that." For a moment, Elena thought she'd imagined the voice deep, warm, threaded with exhaustion. Then she saw him. A man in a simple work shirt stood just a few feet away, hands still damp as if he'd rushed over straight from mopping floors or washing dishes. His breath came a little uneven, and Elena caught the faint sound of it, steadying, grounding. His eyes were the kind that carried long weeks and short nights, but also something gentler beneath the fatigue. "Daisy," he said again, softer this time. "Sweetheart, you can't wander off like that." The little girl turned, her curls brushing against her shoulders, teddy bear swinging at her side. "But Daddy," she whispered, "she's sad." Her father's breath hitched a quiet sigh through his nose. He crouched so his face met hers. "I know, Pumpkin, but we don't talk to guests unless they want to talk. That's the rule." Daisy leaned closer to him and whispered loudly, loud enough that Elena heard every word. "But she needed me." The man closed his eyes for half a second, as if silently asking the universe for patience. Then he looked at Elena. I'm really sorry," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's friendly, too friendly sometimes. I hope she didn't bother you." His voice was careful, respectful, almost apologetic. Elena shook her head. "She didn't bother me at all." "Really?" Daisy immediately brightened, hugging her teddy with both arms. The man straightened, offering a faint, polite smile. "I'm Theo. I work here, janitor, mostly night shifts." He let out a quiet exhale, almost embarrassed to have introduced his job first. "This is my daughter Daisy." "I'm Elena," she replied gently. "And she didn't do anything wrong." Theo nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face just long enough to register the remnants of tears she hadn't fully wiped away. His jaw tightened, not in judgment, but empathy. She could hear the way he swallowed a small click in his throat. Before either of them could say more, footsteps approached, slow, measured, belonging to a man in a vest and tie. "Evening," Elena, the restaurant manager, said warmly. I overheard what happened. His voice lowered just enough to shield her dignity. If you'd like, we can set up a more comfortable spot near the fireplace. On the house. Elena blinked. Oh no, that's really not nonsense, the manager said, brushing away her protest with a friendly wave. Nobody should spend Christmas Eve alone. Daisy tugged Elena's hand, suddenly gentle but hopeful. Come sit with us. Please. Theo's breath caught again. He looked mortified. Daisy, we can't just invite people. The manager lifted a hand. Actually, you can. He turned to Elena with a conspiratorial whisper. These two were about to take their 15-minute break anyway. How about a tiny Christmas supper, just until you're ready to head home? Theo turned bright red. Sir, really, we don't need. It's Christmas, the manager said, simply giving Theo a pat on the shoulder. Sit. Eat something warm. Let the kid enjoy a little holiday magic. The moment hung in the air, tentative, fragile. Elena felt her heartbeat shift its rhythm, softening. She didn't understand why this small invitation mattered. But it did. Maybe because tonight she'd been reminded of everything she didn't have. A family, a home, someone who stayed. And now this tiny 4-year-old was looking at her like she was someone worth choosing. Elena swallowed. If it's okay with you, she said softly, turning to Theo. I'd like that. Theo's gaze flicked between her and Daisy. She heard him inhale, slow, apprehensive, the kind of breath taken by a man who rarely asked for anything, rarely accepted kindness. Then he nodded. All right, he murmured. Just for a few minutes. The small table near the fireplace crackled with warmth, the sound of burning wood popping softly, almost like a welcoming applause. As they sat, Daisy plopped into the middle seat, insisting on being between them, her feet swinging above the floor. Theo sat stiffly, shoulders tense. I'm sorry, again, he said quietly. About earlier. There's nothing to apologize for, Elena replied. Your daughter, she has a good heart. She took after her mom. His voice dipped, almost fading into the fire's hum. Elena sensed the weight behind those words, but didn't push. A server brought out a small plate roast chicken potatoes and a single gingerbread cookie decorated clumsily with red icing. Daisy gasped softly, the sound full of delight. As they ate, Elena noticed every small gesture Theo made, cutting Daisy's food into tiny pieces, blowing on each bit to cool it, nudging her cup closer when she forgot to drink. Care lived in every motion. So Miss Elena Daisy said between bites, Do you always cry at restaurants? Theo almost choked on his water. Daisy. Elena laughed, really laughed for the first time that evening. No, sweetheart. Not usually. Good, Daisy said, nodding wisely. Crying is for home, and when you drop your ice cream. Theo covered his face with one hand. I'm so sorry. Don't be, Elena whispered. She's wonderful. The three of them fell into a rhythm, quiet, unexpected, remarkably natural. And though no music changed, though the fireplace continued its steady crackle, something inside Elena shifted like a door gently opening. She thought she'd feel out of place sitting with them. Instead, she felt found. A subtle warmth pressed against her chest, a soft pulse she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't supposed to happen, she told herself. Not tonight. Not with strangers. But Daisy, blissfully unaware of adult boundaries, leaned her head against Elena's arm as if they'd known each other forever. Theo froze at the sight, torn between gratitude and fear. Because even he could see it. Something was beginning. As the meal ended, the manager called out, breaks over chairs slid, silverware clinked, the fire crackled. But in Elena's mind only one thought echoed. I just sat down for dinner with a stranger and his daughter. On Christmas Eve. And across the table, Theo looked at the spot where Daisy still leaned against Elena. A silent question in his eyes he wasn't ready to voice. What happens if she doesn't come back? The fire cracked softly behind them. its gentle rhythm filling the quiet moments between bites. For the first time in hours, Elena felt her breathing slow, settling into a calmer, warmer cadence. Each inhale tasted faintly of cinnamon and roasted chicken. Each exhale loosened a little more of that sharp ache she'd carried into Snowlight Bistro. Across from her, Daisy swung her legs beneath the chair, humming under her breath an off-key melody, cheerful and unfiltered. She tapped her teddy bear's nose against the edge of her plate, making it taste the mashed potatoes. The little bell sewn into the bear's scarf jingled every time she giggled. It was impossible not to smile watching her. Theo noticed, though he tried not to. He kept his gaze low, shoulders slightly hunched, almost as if he were apologizing for taking up space at the table. But every few seconds he peeked at Elena, quick, cautious glances as though checking whether she still felt comfortable sitting with them. He cut Daisy's chicken into smaller bites. His fork nudged each piece into a neat row, his movements steady and practiced. Elena could hear the quiet scrape of metal against porcelain, the soft clink as he slid the plate closer to his daughter. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured gently. Theo shook his head. "She eats too fast if I don't. Learned that the hard way." He brushed his thumb across the handle of his fork, the sound barely audible. "Kids, they need someone watching." The quiet heaviness of those words drifted between them like a shadow. Daisy didn't seem to notice. She leaned toward Elena, her voice bright. "Guess what?" Elena smiled. "What, I have a cat. Well, not really mine. He comes to our porch. Daddy says he's undecided." Theo huffed a soft laugh, the sound almost reluctant. "That cat chooses when he wants to be family. I don't think he's picked us yet." "Yes, he has," Daisy insisted, tapping her teddy bear's head as if to emphasize the point. "He ate my cheese stick." "That's not proof of loyalty," Kiddo Theo said. Elena laughed a short, surprised sound that softened her entire chest. She hadn't expected this warmth, this easy rhythm, this strange small table that somehow felt safer than the place she'd been sitting alone just an hour earlier. "And this," Daisy continued as if breathlessly needing to share everything at once, "is the chair Daddy made me." She held out her hands wide, miming its size. "He made it from real wood, with paint, and he fixed the wobbly leg even though he said bad words when he hit his thumb." Theo groaned. "Daisy, you said ow." "That's a bad word." "It was not." Theo muttered, his ears turning red. Elena covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Daisy beamed proudly, her small chest puffing out. Then, as if remembering something important, Daisy leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that carried more tenderness than secrecy. "Daddy used to make lots of things. Before the fire." Theo went still. Not suddenly, more like a quiet dimming. His breath slowed and the air around him changed as though he'd stepped back into a place he rarely visited. Elena's smile faded gently. "You're a woodworker." "Used to be," he replied, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "Haven't picked up a saw in a while." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Something in the way he rubbed his thumb against the edge of his plate told its own story, slivers of memory, bits of grief, old sawdust now replaced by janitor shifts and exhaustion. Daisy, oblivious to the depth simmering beneath the adult's silence, swung her teddy bear once more. "Daddy stays with me all the time now. He says no job is more important than me." Elena's heart tugged. She saw the truth in that, etched into the tired kindness in Theo's eyes, the way he positioned himself close enough to Daisy to catch her if she leaned too far, the way he'd rather apologize 1,000 times than risk making someone uncomfortable. She felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't expected. "You're doing a good job," she whispered to Theo. He stiffened. "I'm just doing what I can." "That's what good parents say," she replied softly. Theo didn't respond. His throat bobbed, the sound small but audible, like someone swallowing emotions they weren't ready to show. Daisy interrupted the moment with a sudden declaration. "I like you, Elena." Elena's breath caught. "I like you too." The little girl studied her with a seriousness far beyond her 4 years. Her teddy bear swung from her hand as she leaned forward on her elbows. "If I ever get a new mommy," she said matter-of-factly, "I want her to be like you." It hit Elena like a soft blow, gentle but stunning. She felt something warm and terrifying bloom in her chest. I think that's the sweetest thing anyone's told me in a long time," she whispered. "I'm good at sweet things," Daisy said proudly. Theo pressed his fingertips to his forehead. "Daisy, that's not. We don't talk about. It's just—" He gave up, sighing into his hands. But Elena wasn't upset. She wasn't even startled. She was moved. Deeply, unexpectedly moved. After their meal, when Theo stood to return to work and Daisy stretched her arms wide for a hug, Elena bent to embrace her. The teddy bear's bell jingled between them, soft, hopeful, like a tiny promise. "Thank you for sitting with us," Theo said quietly. His voice held gratitude, and something more fragile beneath it. "Thank you for letting me," she replied. They walked her toward the front, Daisy skipping beside her, humming again. When they reached the door, Daisy tugged Elena's coat gently. "Wait, I have to tell you something." Elena knelt. "What is it?" Daisy cupped her hands around Elena's ear breath, warm and soft. "One day," she whispered, "I'm going to have a new mommy, and I hope it will be you." Elena's entire body froze. The restaurant sounds blurred, the hum of voices, the clink of dishes, the faint echo of the fireplace's crackle. All of it faded until only that tiny whisper existed. Theo inhaled sharply behind them. "Daisy." But it was too late. The words were spoken. The hope was planted. Elena pulled back slowly, hands trembling. Daisy smiled up at her with absolute trust. And for the first time in years, Elena felt something terrifying and beautiful crack open inside her, a longing she thought she'd buried for good. She stepped into the falling snow, the child's whisper echoing in her ears all the way home. It wasn't until Elena closed her apartment door behind her that the silence hit her sharp, absolute, cutting straight through the faint warmth she'd carried home from Snowlight Bistro. A soft click of the lock, and then nothing. No music, no voices, not even the hum of a television to suggest someone else existed in the space. She stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her like a thin, cold sheet. Her breaths were slow, shallow, each one echoing faintly in the stillness. The ticking of the wall clock, usually too soft to notice, now sounded like a steady knock on her memories. Her Christmas tree leaned untouched in the corner, still inside its box. She had planned to decorate it last weekend, but never found the motivation. Decorating felt like something people did when they weren't afraid of being disappointed again. She dropped her keys on the counter. The sound metal on stone rang louder than it should, and Daisy's whisper returned to her as vivid as if the child were still tugging on her sleeve. "One day. I hope it will be you." Elena pressed her fingers to her forehead. "Don't," she murmured to herself. "Don't read into that. She's 4. She's grieving. She's lonely." But loneliness was something Elena understood all too well. It had a sound, an ache she could almost hear if she stood still long enough. Tonight it hummed beneath her ribs like a dull vibration. She set her purse aside and sank onto the edge of the sofa. The leather groaned under her weight, a soft, weary sound that mirrored her own fatigue. She rubbed her hands together for warmth. Something about Snowlight's fireplace had made her feel held protected. Now the cold was sharper. Her eyes drifted to the small tin ornament sitting alone on her coffee table. A silver snowflake she'd bought 3 years ago, the last holiday she spent planning a wedding that would never happen. She reached for it. The metal felt icy, sending a faint shiver up her arm. Christmas Eve, 3 years ago. She remembered the ring shining underneath the lights. She remembered laughing with her friends about wedding colors venues, honeymoon destinations. She remembered thinking her life was finally aligning. Then the message came. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. I don't think I want kids. I'm not ready for a family. It was Christmas Eve. He didn't even come in person. Elena closed her eyes, swallowing hard. Her apartment felt colder now, the memories breathing frost across the room. She placed the ornament down carefully, almost reverently, as if touching it too harshly would shatter something already fragile. Across the city, in a small apartment above a laundromat, another kind of silence lingered. Theo carried Daisy inside her small body, limp with sleep against his shoulder. She smelled faintly of the gingerbread cookie she'd eaten, and the subtle warmth of Snowlight's fireplace clung to her sweater. He laid her gently in her bed, a tiny frame decorated with wooden stars he had carved himself years ago before life had split into before and after. Daisy stirred, but didn't wake. She curled around her teddy bear, the bell in its scarf jingling with the smallest motion. Theo sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair back. The soft sound of her breathing, the slow rhythm, the little hitch at the end of each exhale calmed him. Protector, provider, parent. Every moment of his life revolved around these quiet breaths. But tonight, when she whispered to Elena, "If I ever get a new mommy, I want her to be you," Theo felt something inside him bend, something old and wounded, something he'd tried to bury under responsibility and exhaustion. He stood slowly and moved into the living room. Their Christmas decorations were few: a paper chain Daisy made in preschool, a thrift store stocking, a tiny wooden angel he carved during his wife's pregnancy. The angel's wings were uneven. She had teased him about that. He sat heavily into the worn armchair, feeling it sigh beneath him. From the corner of the room, a framed photo watched him, his wife Lena smiling on a summer day's sunlight caught in her hair. He could almost hear her laugh, soft and airy, a sound he feared he might forget. Theo picked up the photo, tracing the frame with his thumb. "You'd tell me what to do," he whispered to the empty air. "You always knew before I did." He closed his eyes, remembering the last day he saw her. They'd argued something small, something stupid. She had walked out, frustration trailing behind her like smoke. The fire took everything after that, and Theo had spent every day since trying to rebuild something for Daisy, something steady, something safe, even if it meant giving up who he once was. But tonight a stranger had walked into his world and somehow stepped straight into the places he'd spent years trying to keep closed. Elena, the woman with tear-stained cheeks and a trembling voice who still managed to smile at his daughter like she was worth loving. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the space between his eyebrows. "I can't let Daisy get attached," he muttered. "Not again. Not unless—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't dare. At the same moment in her apartment, Elena's phone buzzed. A new message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, Elena. This is Mark from Snowlight Bistro. Just wanted to thank you for being so kind to Theo and Daisy tonight. If you ever want to stop by again, you're always welcome here." Elena stared at the message. Such a small gesture. But somehow it reached deeper than it should. She hovered her thumb over the keyboard heart, thumping softly in her ears. Should I go back? Why would I? But why did tonight feel different? After a long moment, she didn't reply. She simply saved the number. One small action. Barely anything at all. Yet something inside her whispered, this might matter. Elena set her phone down and looked once more at the unopened Christmas tree box. Then, unexpectedly, she whispered aloud, "I don't want another Christmas alone." And somewhere across Boston, Theo placed his wife's photo face down, whispering into the dark, "I can't let Daisy hope. Not unless I'm ready to hope too." Both of them stood on the edge of something they couldn't yet name, one saved phone number away from changing everything. Snow fell in soft, steady sheets over Boston during the days that followed, flakes tapping lightly against cafe windows, brushing over rooftops, settling into the faint hum of a city preparing for the new year. Elena felt that hum inside her too, a quiet vibration, a subtle pull, a sense of something beginning, though she couldn't yet define it. 3 days after her Christmas Eve at Snowlight Bistro, she found herself walking past the restaurant again. She paused outside, pretending to check her phone, though in truth she was listening for the familiar sounds drifting through the door each time a server walked out, clinking cutlery-low chatter, the soft sweep of chairs sliding back across the hardwood floor. She didn't plan to go in. Not really, but somehow her feet did the choosing. The moment she stepped through the door, the warmth wrapped around her like a gentle embrace. The faint crackle of the fireplace, the soft whistle of a kettle from the back kitchen, distant laughter from one of the staff. Then came a different sound. Elena. The shrill joy in Daisy's voice cut through every layer of background noise. The little girl barreled toward her boots, thudding across the floor, teddy bear flying behind her like a cape. Before Elena could respond, Daisy crashed into her legs, arms wrapping tight around her. "You came back!" Daisy squealed, breathless with excitement. Elena laughed an unguarded, surprised sound. "I had some work to finish. Thought I'd do it here." Daisy gasped dramatically. At our restaurant, Elena nodded, amused. Theo appeared a moment later from behind the service counter, wiping his hands on a towel. When he saw Elena, he paused. Just paused. His breath hitched softly, barely audible but unmistakable. Not discomfort, more like a quiet shock he wasn't prepared for. "You're back," he said, trying and failing to sound casual. "She's working," Daisy answered for him as though she were the official interpreter of adult conversations. Theo shot his daughter a helpless look. "Daisy." But Daisy had already turned back to Elena, tugging at her sleeve. "Sit by the window. That's the warmest spot. Daddy says the heater there is strongest because he fixed it." "Right, Daddy." Yeah," Theo muttered, embarrassed. "It's working now." The manager caught sight of them and smiled knowingly. "Elena, coffee on the house. And if you need quiet, just wave at us, we can shush the kitchen." Elena settled into the corner table, opening her laptop. The rhythmic tapping of her keys blended with the ambient sounds of the restaurant. She found comfort in the noise, the clinks, the soft footsteps, the gentle swoosh of the front door opening and closing. None of it felt intrusive. It felt lived in, like being in the presence of something warm without needing to join it. Minutes into her work, a small shadow appeared beside her. Daisy, a book in her hands, a book upside down nonetheless. "Can you read me a story?" she asked, hopeful eyes peeking over the pages. Elena blinked. "Aren't you supposed to be napping?" Daisy shook her head with great seriousness. "I don't nap on days when angels visit." Elena laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. Theo hurried over, mortified. "Daisy, you can't just—" "It's okay," Elena interrupted softly. "I don't mind." A new rhythm began, forming fragile, tender, unannounced. Every day, Elena found some reason to visit Snowlight Bistro, and every day Daisy greeted her like a small firecracker wrapped in a velvet dress. Tiny traditions were born without any of them noticing. Daisy pulled Elena into 5-minute story time before nap hour. Elena helped Theo organize a cluttered corner of the restaurant, her hands brushing against scraps of wood he'd saved from broken furniture. Theo began preparing a special hot chocolate for her, adding just the right amount of cinnamon after watching her quietly push aside one too many overly sweet cups. Daisy drew pictures, most of them depicting 3 stick figures holding hands. The third figure always had long hair and a bright red dress. One afternoon, as the sky darkened earlier than expected, snow began falling, faster flakes landing with hushed taps on the windows. Elena was packing up her laptop when she felt a soft tug at her sleeve. "Are you going home now?" Daisy asked. "Yes, sweetheart." Daisy's small fingers tightened. "If you go, will you come back tomorrow?" The question hit Elena in a place she wasn't prepared for. The longing in Daisy's voice was unmistakable, quiet, pure, fragile. "I'll try," Elena whispered. "Promise." Elena hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because something inside her warned her not to make promises lightly. She'd lived through broken ones. She'd learned they hurt worse than silence. But Daisy looked up with such hope. Elena began. Before she could answer, the front door opened, letting in a gust of cold wind. Theo called out from the back, "Daisy, your scarf!" "Don't wander off." Daisy didn't move. Her hand clung to Elena, small and trembling. "Elena, if you go away forever, what will I do?" The question wasn't dramatic. It wasn't childish. It wasn't even loud. It was soft, achingly soft, like the fragile voice of someone who'd already lost more than a child should. Elena knelt to meet her eyes. "Daisy, I'm not going away forever. I just need to get home. But people leave." Daisy swallowed her breath, catching. "My mommy left. And then you didn't come for a long time. What if I did something wrong?" The floor beneath Elena seemed to tilt. Her own heart clenched. She recognized that fear the way a child internalizes loss, believing it must be their fault. "Oh, sweetheart," Elena whispered, pulling Daisy gently into her arms. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not ever." Behind them, Theo froze. He had stepped out from the kitchen, a crate of glasses in his hands. At Daisy's trembling voice, the crate dipped slightly. The faint clatter of glass echoed across the room. Theo heard every word, and he felt every one of them like a bruise forming beneath his ribs. As Elena held Daisy close, the little girl whispered into her shoulder, voice shaking, "If you leave, who will stay for me?" Elena closed her eyes, the weight of Daisy's fear settling deep within her. And from across the room, Theo watched, heart torn between gratitude and the rising dread that Daisy was beginning to love Elena too much too fast. The question now hovered between them like a fragile ornament hanging by a thread. What happens if Elena can't stay? The wind outside Snowlight Bistro howled in restless swirls, rattling the back door just enough for the staff to glance over now and then. The forecast had warned of a small winter storm rolling through Boston. Manageable, the radio insisted, light icing possible. But anyone who'd lived here long enough knew what that meant, be careful stepping outside. Inside the restaurant, warmth hummed softly. The kitchen clattered with muffled pans. The crackle of the fireplace pulsed like a steady heartbeat, and Daisy's soft hums filled the space between moments. Elena lingered near the coat rack, adjusting her scarf while Daisy clung to her hand as though letting go would make something terrible happen. Theo finished wiping a spill behind the service counter. His movements were clean, efficient, but tense. There was a tightness in his breath, short exhales through his nose, shallow inhales as if he were bracing for something he couldn't name. "Daisy," he called gently, "I need to check the pipes out back. There's some ice forming. Stay in the dining room, okay? No wandering." Daisy nodded, though her fingers curled tighter around Elena's sweater. "Don't go yet," she whispered to Elena. "I'll be right here," Elena assured her softly. "I promise. Promise." The word echoed in Elena's mind, too heavy, too fragile, too dangerous given everything this little girl had endured. But she couldn't take it back. Not when Daisy's eyes softened the way they did, trusting her with something precious. Theo grabbed his worn jacket and stepped toward the back door. Elena heard the faint creak of the hinges, the gust of cold air that rushed in, and then the door clicked shut behind him. His footsteps crunched faintly across the icy landing. The manager called to Elena from across the room, "If you need a ride home, let us know. The roads are getting slick." "I'll be okay," she answered. But right then, Daisy tugged her sleeve again. Can I give Daddy his scarf?" Daisy asked, holding up a small knitted piece, a faded green scarf that had clearly been worn through multiple winters. Elena hesitated. "Sweetheart," he said to stay inside. "I know," Daisy mumbled, lowering her head, "but he forgets it a lot, and he gets cold." Before Elena could respond, Daisy slipped from her grasp and darted toward the back hallway. Daisy, Elena hissed, hurrying after her. Daisy was too quick for a 4-year-old, but fear makes children bold. She pushed through the swinging door leading to the back kitchen, her boots tapping lightly against the tile. "Daisy!" "Wait," Elena whispered urgently. But the little girl had already reached the rear exit. The cold seeped in through the cracks around the door, biting at Elena's cheeks. Outside, the alleyway was covered in a thin sheet of ice. Snow had begun to fall harder, each flake brushing the metal railing with a soft sound like tiny whispers urging caution. Daisy pushed the door open just an inch and slipped out. "Daddy," she called. "Daddy," her foot hit the edge of the slick stair. Everything happened in one sound. A gasp, a slip, a small, terrified squeak of a cry, sharp and high like a bell struck too hard. Daisy, Elena, lunged for her. Theo, just a few feet away, bent over the frozen pipes, whipped around at the sound. His boots skidded slightly on the ice as he ran toward them, but Elena reached Daisy first, grabbing the child's coat collar and pulling her tight against her chest. The momentum sent both of them tumbling into a drift of snow beside the railing. The impact was soft but cold snow puffing into the air around them like a startled cloud. Daisy clung to Elena, trembling. Her breaths were ragged fast, tiny, desperate gasps. Elena wrapped both arms around her, her own heart drumming wildly. "You're okay," she whispered. "I've got you. You're okay." Theo reached them a moment later, dropping to his knees. "Daisy," his voice cracked, fear and relief colliding. Daisy buried her face into Elena's shoulder, sobbing. I thought I was gonna, like Mommy." Theo's whole body went still. Silence fell heavy. The snowfall softened around them. The world narrowed to one crying child, one terrified father, and one woman holding a little girl who wasn't hers, yet somehow fit in her arms as if she always had been. Elena tightened her hold around Daisy. "You're safe," she murmured. "You're right here." Theo swallowed hard, kneeling in the snow. His voice trembled. "Daisy, sweetheart, you scared me to death." Daisy reached one tiny hand toward him without letting go of Elena. "I only wanted to give you your scarf." Theo closed his eyes, breath shaking. He gathered Daisy from Elena's arms, wrapping her into his chest. She clutched both of them, a hand on Theo's coat, a hand still gripping Elena's sleeve. "I'm sorry," Daisy whispered. "Don't be mad. I'm not mad." Theo's voice broke. "I'm just scared." Elena rose slowly from the snow-brushing flakes from her coat. The moment she stood, Daisy's small voice followed her. "Elena, don't leave." Elena's chest tightened. "I'm not leaving, sweetheart. I'm here." Theo looked up at her, then eyes filled with something raw. Not anger, not blame, something far more complicated. Something like fear and gratitude, fear and longing, fear and realization. Back inside the restaurant, the warmth hit them instantly. The crackle of the fire, the murmur of staff, the soft clinking of dishes. Daisy clung to Elena until Theo gently pried her away to set her on a chair. "Thank you," he said quietly to Elena. His voice carried a depth she hadn't heard before. "You saved her." Elena shook her head. "You would have gotten to her." "No," he whispered. "You didn't hesitate. You saw she needed someone. And you were there." He paused, and this pause hurt. "I'm not sure that's good," he added softly, eyes dropping. "She's getting too attached, and I don't know if I can protect her from losing someone again." The words hit Elena like a cold wind. She wanted to say something soothing, something true, something that would ease the tension in his shoulders. But all she managed was a quiet Theo. Daisy reached for Elena again, but this time Theo gently pulled her hand back, shaking his head. "We need to be careful," he murmured. Elena felt the sting of that. Not because he was wrong, but because for the first time she realized she wanted Daisy to be attached to her. She wanted to stay. She wasn't sure when that happened. But it had happened, and it was terrifying. Later that night, when Elena reached home, she found Daisy's tiny green scarf still clinging to her coat sleeve. She pulled it off gently, holding it against her chest as though it were something far more significant than wool. And in the quiet of her apartment, she whispered, "Am I getting too attached, too?" Across town. Theo sat awake long after Daisy fell asleep, replaying the moment she nearly slipped from his world, and the moment Elena stepped in to catch her. Neither of them slept easily that night, because both felt it. Something was shifting. Something they weren't ready for, but couldn't stop now. The first sign something was different at Snowlight Bistro came from the way the air shifted quiet, subtle, like a room inhaling before speaking. Elena didn't notice it when she first arrived that afternoon, her scarf still holding the faint scent of Daisy's little green wool. She didn't expect anything unusual. She'd come to work, sip her hot chocolate, maybe read a story to Daisy before nap time. But the moment she stepped through the door, she felt eyes on her, not unfriendly, not suspicious, simply watchful. Daisy spotted her first as always. "Elena," her voice chimed tiny boots pattering across the floor as she ran into Elena's arms with a practiced leap. Elena laughed softly. "Hi, sweetheart." Normally, Theo would appear right after her apologizing, flustered, grateful, or all three at once. But this time, his footsteps were slower. He approached with his shoulders stiff, his expression more guarded than usual. "Hi," he said quietly. "Thanks for coming." "Of course." Elena offered a warm smile, but he didn't mirror it the way he usually did. Before she could ask what was wrong, the front door opened with a bell chime, and a woman stepped inside, a woman whose presence changed the room's entire gravity. She wasn't intimidating, not in the sharp sense. She was elegant in a lived-in way, a long wool coat, silver streaks brushing through neatly tied hair eyes, full of the kind of wisdom earned through both grief and endurance. She carried a tote bag with children's stickers on the side, some peeling, some new. Daisy froze in Elena's arms. Then her voice lifted in a delighted cry. "Grandma!" The woman's face softened instantly. She opened her arms and Daisy ran to her teddy bear, bouncing behind her like a loyal shadow. Elena felt her breath catch. "This is Margaret, Lena's mother, Theo's mother-in-law, Daisy's last tie to her mother's world." Theo stepped forward. "Mom, Margaret, didn't know you were coming today." Margaret kissed Daisy's hair before straightening. "I needed to see my granddaughter." Her voice was steady but warm. Then her gaze shifted to Elena, curious assessing layered with something Elena couldn't quite name. "And you must be the woman I've been hearing so much about." Elena blinked. "Oh, Daisy and I just—" "Yes," Margaret said, her smile gentle but pointed. "Daisy told me a great deal." Theo cleared his throat. "Mom, don't make this awkward." "I'm not." Margaret's tone was calm. "I'm simply observing." Daisy insisted on showing her grandmother the holiday drawings she'd made, tugging her toward a booth. Margaret followed, indulging her granddaughter with a kind smile. But her eyes flicked back to Elena again and again, as though trying to solve a puzzle quietly. Elena sat near her usual table, pretending to work, but her heart beat an uneven pattern. She felt exposed, like someone had peeled back the fragile layers she'd been building with Daisy and Theo. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I sit with you?" Elena looked up. Margaret stood beside her, hands folded in front of her. Polite, composed, impossible to refuse. "Of course," Elena replied. Margaret took the seat across from her. The fireplace popped softly in the background, a steady metronome of warm sound. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret began, slow, careful. "I want to thank you," she said. "Whatever you've been to Daisy these past days, it's made her light up in ways I haven't seen since Lena passed." Elena blinked at the tenderness in her tone. "She's a remarkable child." "She is." Margaret folded her hands. The slight tremble in her fingers suggested she was holding something inside something heavy. And she's been through more than most adults can imagine. Elena nodded. Theo mentioned some things. Margaret exhaled through her nose, the sound soft and weary. He tries so hard, harder than he should have to. My daughter loved him fiercely, and losing her shattered him. It shattered all of us. Elena swallowed gently, feeling the weight of those words settle between them. Margaret's eyes softened. That's why I need to ask you something. Elena's breath hitched, not a gasp, just a tiny, involuntary intake. Ask me. Margaret leaned forward, voice lowering. If you're not planning to stay in Daisy's life, please be careful with how close you allow her to be with you. The world seemed to still just for a beat. The fire crackled. Cutlery clinked faintly in the distance. Daisy giggled somewhere behind them, and Elena's heartbeat pulsed inside her throat. I never meant to cause harm, she whispered. I know. Margaret's tone was kind, not accusatory. But hope is a delicate thing, my dear. Daisy lost her mother. She remembers Peace's little moments, the sound of her laugh, her smell, and she still waits for someone to fill the silence left behind. Elena's chest tightened. Margaret continued. And you? Well, you're gentle with her. She responds to that. But Daisy is too young to understand that grown-ups sometimes leave without meaning to. Elena felt a dull ache rise beneath her ribs. Are you asking me to disappear? Margaret shook her head. I'm asking you to choose what you can handle. The words were soft, but they hit with the force of truth. Theo approached just then, wiping his hands on his apron. Everything okay here? Margaret offered a serene smile. Just chatting. Daisy ran to Elena again, hugging her arm. Can you tell me a story before you go? Elena's heart twisted. But something fragile inside her was already backing away. Fear, guilt, confusion, intertwining like threads she couldn't pull apart. I'm a little busy today, she murmured, brushing Daisy's cheek. Maybe later, okay. Daisy's smile faded. Just a little, but enough. Enough for Theo to notice. Enough for Margaret to look down. Enough for Elena to feel her throat tighten. She left Snow Light earlier than usual that evening. She told the staff she had work. She told herself it was temporary. But as she walked into the cold Boston night, the quiet truth whispered inside her. You're afraid. Because if you stay, you'll want more. And if you want more, you could lose it. That night, as Daisy lay in bed, clutching the little scarf Elena once returned, she whispered, Daddy, did I do something wrong? Is that why she didn't stay today? Theo exhaled slowly, feeling something in him fracture. And miles away, Elena sat on her couch, staring at her silent phone, wanting to reach out, terrified to do so. 3 hearts beating in 3 different rooms, all afraid of the same thing, losing something before it even begins. Snowlight Bistro rarely felt loud. Even on busy nights, its noise carried a warmth, laughter softened by the scent of cinnamon, gentle clinks of silverware, the low hum of conversations blending like a familiar melody. But on the evening of the Christmas Eve charity night, the restaurant was alive in a way Elena had never seen. Music drifted through the dining room. Children chattered excitedly backstage, and the soft thud of winter boots echoed as families hurried in, shaking snow from their coats. It was the kind of night meant for celebration, joy, community, healing. But for Elena, joy felt like a distant concept. She hovered at her apartment window long after dark, watching snow bleed slow trails against the glass, debating whether stepping into a world she'd begun to retreat from was a mistake. You should stay home, her fear whispered. But Daisy will look for you something gentler, argued back. That second voice, small but determined, won. She grabbed her coat heart, pounding in a rhythm she couldn't quiet. Snowlight was buzzing when she arrived. Through the frosted glass she could see families gathered at tables, the light from the fireplace painting soft, golden shapes along the walls. The moment she walked inside, a wave of warmth struck her heat-sound memories. She stood near the back, close enough to blend into the shadows. No one noticed her at first, except one little girl. Daisy stood on stage with a small group of children dressed in a red velvet dress and tiny white shoes. Her curls bounced as she scanned the room, gripping her teddy bear for courage. And then she saw her. Elena. Daisy's eyes brightened so instantly, so completely, that Elena felt the breath leave her chest. The little girl waved with both hands, hopping in place. Theo, adjusting the microphone stand on stage, followed Daisy's gaze. He froze. A flicker of something, hope, fear, maybe both, crossed his face before he returned to the mic cord he was tying. The charity program began. Children sang their voices sweet and earnest, some too soft to hear others brimming with excitement. Parents clapped. Margaret sat in the front row, hands folded neatly, watching Daisy with quiet pride. The moment Daisy's turn came, she stepped toward the edge of the stage, looking directly at Elena. Elena pressed a hand against her own heart. The thump beneath her palm felt like a plea. "Go on, sweetheart," Theo whispered to Daisy. Daisy's voice floated across the room, thin at first, then stronger, then surprisingly pure for a child her age. As she finished, applause erupted. But instead of stepping backstage with the others, Daisy darted off the stage and through the crowd. The sound of her little shoes tapping along the hardwood floor cut through the chatter. Straight toward Elena. When she reached her, Daisy wrapped her arms tight around her waist, burying her face into Elena's coat. Elena staggered slightly, caught between shock and tenderness. "Daisy, sweetheart." The room quieted. People noticed. Margaret tensed in her seat. Theo's posture stiffened from across the room. Daisy pulled back just enough to look up at Elena. Then, with a voice clearer than any note she'd sung, she declared, "This is my mom. This is my new mom." The entire restaurant went still. The whispering began almost immediately. "Is that Theo's new girlfriend? Already? But his wife? She seems nice, but so fast. Poor child, she's confused." Elena felt heat crawl up her neck, her heartbeat stumbling into her ears. She knelt to Daisy, trying to steady her voice. "Sweetheart." "I'm not." But Daisy interrupted, hugging her fiercely. "You feel like my mommy." Elena's throat tightened. Her eyes stung. She wanted to hold the little girl. She wanted to protect her from every whisper in the room. But this wasn't a private moment, and it wasn't hers to claim. Theo pushed through the crowd, expression tense, pain wrapped tightly beneath restraint. "Daisy," he said softly, kneeling beside them. "Sweetheart, you can't say that." "But it's true," Daisy insisted, her voice quivering. "She makes me feel safe." Theo's breath faltered. For a moment he said nothing. Then he gently pried Daisy's arms from Elena. "Daisy," he whispered, fighting the tremor in his voice, "Elena is not your mother." The words cut, sharp, cold. Elena felt something deep inside her rupture. Not because he was wrong, but because every wound she had carried since her broken engagement flared awake at once. Not enough. Not chosen. Not family material. Daisy's face crumpled. "But I thought her voice broke into sobs. Painful, heaving sobs. Elena reached for her, but Theo shook his head almost imperceptibly. The rejection wasn't aimed at Elena. It was fear, pure, desperate fear for his daughter. But it still landed like a blow. Margaret rose, quietly moving toward the scene while whispers rippled around them. Theo lifted Daisy into his arms. She clung to his shirt, crying into his shoulder. "I thought I could choose her," she sobbed. Elena's breath shattered. She stood slowly. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Daisy," she whispered, voice breaking, "I'm so sorry." The child's cries tore through her. They tore through Theo, too, his jaw clenched, his eyes squeezed shut. Elena turned. She didn't wait to see the expressions around her. She didn't wait for explanations or apologies. She stepped into the cold night, the door closing behind her with a muffled thud. Outside, the snow swallowed the noise of the restaurant. Her breath came in tight, painful bursts. She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep a sob from escaping. "You shouldn't have come," her fear whispered. "She needed you, something deeper argued. But you're not her mother." Reality snapped. Inside Snowlight Bistro, Daisy's cries carried through the walls, and Elena walked away from the sound, because staying felt impossible. Leaving felt unbearable. As Elena disappeared into the snowy darkness, Daisy's voice rose behind the restaurant door, a broken whisper muffled by tears. "Daddy. Why can't she be my mom?" And for the first time since losing his wife, Theo had no answer. None at all. Snowlight Bistro glowed with warmth that night, but the warmth no longer reached Daisy. After the charity event, the restaurant staff lowered their voices around her. The lights felt dimmer. Even the crackle of the fireplace, usually her favorite sound, seemed too loud, as if it were trying to fill a silence that had grown too heavy for her tiny chest. Theo carried Daisy out through the back door, her arms still locked around his neck, her face pressed tightly against his coat. Each small breath she took hit him like a bruise, shallow, shaky, painful. He kept whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here." But even to his own ears, the words sounded thin. The snowfall outside softened the world into white silence. Snowflakes brushed against Theo's jacket, melting instantly with soft taps he could hardly hear over the sound of Daisy's sniffling. They reached the car, and he buckled her into the back seat. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. The little teddy bear sat limp beside her, its bell making a faint sound each time her trembling shoulder brushed it. Theo's chest tightened. Daisy wasn't usually quiet. Even on hard days she would hum or whisper to her bear, or ask questions about the moon. Tonight she stared at her shoes. He closed the door with a soft click and climbed into the driver's seat. The heater groaned awake, blowing warm air across the windshield. "Do you want to listen to your bedtime song?" Theo asked gently. Daisy shook her head. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" No response. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Snowflakes hit the glass with soft taps, tiny beats of winter that made the silence feel even bigger. Back at their apartment, Theo carried her upstairs. The hallway lights hummed. The radiator clicked softly in the corner. These familiar sounds used to soothe Daisy. Tonight, she didn't even seem to hear them. He set her on the bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She turned slightly away, hugging her bear so tight its yarn nose bent sideways. Theo brushed her forehead. "Sweetheart, look at me." Slowly, Daisy turned her eyes, red lashes still wet. Then in a small voice that cracked through the dark, she whispered, "Daddy, did I make her leave?" Theo felt something inside him splinter. "No, no, Daisy. None of this is your fault." But she ran away. Daisy's lip trembled. She didn't even say goodbye. Theo swallowed hard. There were few things in life he hated more than seeing Daisy hurt, and tonight he'd made it worse by reacting from fear instead of love. He sat beside her. The bed springs creaked under his weight. "Daisy. Elena didn't leave because of you." Daisy looked unconvinced. "But I said she was my mom, and you said she isn't." And everyone stared, and then she left. Theo closed his eyes against the ache blooming in his chest. "She left because Daddy made a mistake," he whispered. "Because I got scared of what she asked." Theo exhaled slowly, the sound long and heavy. Scared of losing someone again. Daisy blinked. "Like Mommy." He nodded. "But Elena isn't gone," Daisy whispered hopefully. "Right." Theo hesitated. His breath hitched. "I don't know, sweetheart." Daisy stared down at her blanket, twisting it in her fingers. She looked so small, so breakable, so much like the child he'd held after the fire, promising her he'd protect her from every hurt in the world. He was failing at that promise tonight. Daddy Daisy asked softly. Yes. Did I break something by calling her Mommy? The question stabbed through him so sharply he had to inhale before answering. No, Theo said immediately, gathering her into his arms. You didn't break anything. You only said what you felt, and it wasn't wrong. Daisy rested her head against his chest. But, did you want her to be my mom? Theo froze. The radiator hummed. The wind brushed against the window. The teddy bear's bell chimed faintly. He couldn't lie. Not to Daisy. Not tonight. I don't know, he whispered honestly. I think I'm scared to want anything that big. Daisy's fingers curled into his shirt. I'm scared too. He kissed her forehead, tucking the blanket around her. Get some sleep, sweetheart. Daisy nodded, though her eyes stayed open long after he turned off the light. In another part of the city, Elena sat at her kitchen table surrounded by silence thick enough to hear the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant whoosh of cars passing outside. Her coat was still on, her hair still damp with melted snow. She kept replaying the scene. Daisy's voice, Theo's correction, the whispers, the humiliation, the pain. She pressed her palms against her eyes. You knew better, she scolded herself. You knew not to let yourself get attached. But she had. Oh, she had. On the table lay Daisy's tiny green scarf, the same one Elena had saved earlier in the week. She ran her fingers over the yarn, feeling the uneven stitches. She remembered Daisy's warm little hand when she'd placed the scarf in her palm. Tears threatened again. Why does it hurt this much? She's not your child. He's not your partner. This isn't your family. Yet, somehow, it felt like the closest thing she'd had to one in years. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A text from the restaurant manager. Elena. I don't know what happened tonight, but Daisy cried herself sick after you left. She's been asking for you. Please, if you can reach out. Elena closed her eyes. Every part of her wanted to run, to protect herself, to guard the part of her heart that had been bruised too many times to count. But then she imagined Daisy's face, the trembling voice, the way she'd clung to her because Elena made her feel safe. And something inside her cracked. Back in the apartment, Theo rubbed his forehead, pacing quietly. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. You could have handled that better, she said gently. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. I know, but you can still fix it, Margaret added softly. Theo's head lifted. How Margaret met his eyes, her voice low. Start by finding Elena. Theo stared at her. Then with a suddenness that surprised them both, he went to the drawer, pulled out Daisy's forgotten scarf, and grabbed his coat. Minutes later, Theo stood outside Elena's studio building, snow dusting his hairbreadth visible in the cold air, Daisy's scarf clutched tightly in his hand. He raised his hand to press the buzzer. And as the door's faint hum echoed in the silent hallway, the chapter ended on that suspended note right before it opened. The hallway outside Elena's studio was quiet enough that Theo could hear the faint hum of the building's old radiator. His breath came out in soft clouds that hung in the air before dissolving. Snow still clung to his coat sleeves, melting slowly and dripping onto the worn carpet. He stared at the buzzer, Daisy's little green scarf clenched in his fist. Don't be an idiot, his fear whispered. But she deserves the truth. Something braver answered. He pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked and the door creaked open. Elena appeared in the doorway, hair pulled into a loose, tired ponytail. Eyes, red from crying sweater sleeves, pushed up her arms as if she'd been pacing. She froze when she saw him, and he froze too. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick, pulsing with everything they hadn't said. Theo cleared his throat, but his voice still came out rough. I found Daisy's scarf. He held it out awkwardly. The scarf shook slightly in his trembling hand. Elena looked at it then, at him. She didn't take it. Not yet. Her voice was soft-guarded. Why are you here, Theo? He swallowed hard. Because I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you more than one. Elena stepped aside. Come in. He did slowly, carefully, as if afraid he might break something just by breathing too loudly. Her apartment was quiet except for the faint whir of her heater. A half-empty mug of tea sat on the counter. The place looked lived in, but lonely. She stood by the window, arms crossed. Go ahead. Theo took a breath. I panicked. When Daisy said what she said, when everyone was staring, I didn't know how to handle it. Elena looked down at the floor. It's okay. No, Theo said firmly. It's not. He rubbed the scarf between his fingers. I hurt you, and I hurt my daughter, and I did both because I was scared. Elena's voice cracked just slightly, scared of what he shifted his weight shoulders heavy, of getting attached, of her getting attached, of losing someone again. Because when Lena died, His voice faltered. I didn't think I'd survive it. Elena's breath caught. She stepped a little closer. Theo. He shook his head. Let me finish. She nodded. Theo's eyes softened dark with honesty he'd been afraid to speak aloud. Daisy. She misses having a mom. Not a replacement. Not someone to erase Lena. Just someone who feels safe. And you walked into her world like you'd always belonged there. Elena blinked away, rising emotion. She's special. Of course she is. She is. Theo agreed. And because she's special, I got scared she'd get hurt again, that I'd let her believe something that wasn't real. I thought pushing you away would protect her. He paused, voice lowering. But I think I just proved that I'm the one who doesn't know how to love without fear. Elena exhaled shakily, her grip tightening on her sweater sleeves. You weren't the only one scared. Theo looked up sharply. Elena's voice wavered but didn't break. When Daisy said those words, when she looked at me like that, something inside me lit up, and that terrified me. I haven't let myself want a family since she paused, swallowing. Since the night my fiancé walked out of my life and told me I wasn't what he wanted. Theo's face tightened in quiet anger, not at her, but for her. Elena continued, and the moment you said I wasn't her mother, every old wound came rushing back. It felt like being rejected all over again. Theo stepped closer, slow, respectful as though approaching a fragile truth. Elena, I wasn't rejecting you. I was rejecting the fear of losing someone again. I should have told you the difference. Tears welled in her eyes. Why are you here now? Theo, his answer came without hesitation. Because Daisy fell asleep asking if you hated her. He took another step toward her. And because I realized something that scared me more than losing control of the situation. Elena's breath trembled. What? That I want you to stay, Theo whispered, not just for Daisy, but for me. Her heart stuttered at those words. Theo set the scarf on her table. It landed with the softest sound, barely a whisper, but heavy with meaning. I'm not asking you for forever, he said. I'm not asking you to be her mother today or tomorrow or maybe ever. I'm just asking for a chance, for the three of us, to see where this could go. Elena held her breath. Theo continued, his voice warm and unpolished. We can go slow. We should go slow. But I promise you this, if you walk into our world again, I won't push you out. Not out of fear, not out of pride, not out of anything. There was a long, trembling silence. Then Elena took a step toward him. I don't know if I can handle another heartbreak, I know, Theo said. But I also know heartbreak doesn't scare me as much as losing the chance to try. Her eyes glistened. Something softened in her posture, something small, hopeful, trembling, yet real. She nodded once. Okay. Theo's breath escaped in a shaky exhale as though he'd been holding it for days. Okay, he repeated quietly. Okay, she whispered, but she didn't fall into his arms, and he didn't reach for her. Both of them understood this moment wasn't about romance. It was about permission. It was about healing. It was about choosing not the fantasy of a ready-made family, but the courage to build one slowly. Theo stepped back, letting the moment breathe. "Whenever you're ready, come to Snowlight. Daisy would love to see you." Elena closed her eyes, steadying herself. When she opened them again, there was a new clarity in them. "I'll come," she said softly. "Not tonight, but soon." Theo nodded. "Take your time." As he turned to leave, Elena's hand brushed the green scarf on the table. The yarn felt warm now, like something that had been held cherished and returned not as an object, but as a promise. The next evening, the bell above Snowlight Bistro chimed softly. Theo looked up from wiping a table, and there she stood in the doorway, coat dusted with snow-green scarf folded in her hands, breath unsteady but determined. She had come back, but what Daisy would say, what Daisy would ask, would change everything. Snowlight Bistro glowed as if holding its breath for something sacred. The soft hum of conversations, the gentle pop of the fireplace, and the faint brush of winter wind against the windows blended into a warm tapestry of sound. It wasn't Christmas Eve anymore, just a quiet winter night, but somehow the place felt holy, as though the walls themselves understood what tonight was about to hold. Elena stood at the doorway for a long moment, letting the warmth wash over her. She clutched Daisy's green scarf in her hands, her breath trembling with anticipation. Somewhere deep in her chest, something whispered, "You're ready." Theo turned from the table he'd been wiping down. When he saw her, he froze, not out of shock this time, but something gentler, something steady, something hopeful. "You came," he breathed. Elena managed a small smile. "I said I would." Before either of them could say more, a tiny shriek of joy soared across the room. "Elena!" Daisy sprinted from the back like a burst of starlight teddy bear bouncing wildly behind her. She collided into Elena with full force, wrapping her little arms tight around Elena's waist. "You came back," Daisy whispered, her voice trembling with relief. "I knew you would. I told Daddy. I told Grandma. I told my bear. I told everybody." Elena laughed softly, the sound breaking open something warm inside her. She knelt and brushed a curl from Daisy's cheek. "I promised, remember?" Daisy nodded vigorously. "And you kept it." Theo approached slowly, a soft exhale escaping him, the kind that sounded like someone finally letting themselves breathe. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "I am, too," Elena replied, and she meant it with her whole heart. The manager approached with an unusual grin. "Your table is ready." "Our table," Elena echoed. He winked. "The one by the window. The one with the fireplace glow. The one where all good stories begin." Guided by Daisy's eager hand, Elena allowed herself to be led to the very same table where Marcus had abandoned her weeks before. But tonight, it wasn't a place of rejection or loss. Tonight, it was set for three. 3 sets of silverware. 3 napkins. 3 gently flickering candles. Theo and Elena exchanged a glance, soft, acknowledging, full of everything they had survived to arrive here. They sat together, the glow of the room wrapping around them like a quiet blessing. Theo cleared his throat, fingers brushing the rim of his water glass. "I remember you sitting here that night," he said. "You looked alone. And I wished I had the courage to walk over and offer you a warm meal then." Elena smiled. "You had your hands full." He chuckled softly. "I always do." Daisy climbed into the chair between them, teddy bear perched on her lap. She looked between them with the solemn seriousness only young children possess when they sense grown-up hearts shifting. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. Can I ask her now?" Theo blinked. "Ask her." "What?" But Daisy didn't wait. She slid down from her chair and walked around the table, her tiny feet brushing softly across the wooden floor. The sounds of the restaurant dimmed, not literally, but in that strange way the universe sometimes hushes itself for moments that matter. Daisy reached Elena's side and tugged on her sleeve. "Elena," she said softly. Elena knelt, heart already pounding. Daisy leaned closer, just like the thumbnail moment that had stayed with Elena since the first night they met. The child's breath warmed Elena's ear. Her voice trembled not with fear, but hope. "Will you be my new mom?" Elena's breath broke on the inhale. Daisy's small hands fidgeted nervously. "You don't have to be like Mommy before. You can be you. I just want someone who stays. Someone who picks me. Someone who doesn't leave." The words hit Elena with the force of a wave, powerful, aching, beautiful. Theo stood slowly watching them with a tenderness that softened the air. His eyes glistened, his breath uneven. "Daisy," Elena whispered, brushing a tear from the girl's cheek. "Being a mom isn't something you become just by saying a word. It's something you choose, with your whole heart." Daisy nodded earnestly. "And you're asking me if I choose you," Elena murmured. Daisy nodded again this time, slower, more vulnerable. "And Daddy, too," she whispered, "but mostly me." A soft, breathy laugh escaped Theo despite himself. Elena cupped Daisy's face with both hands. "Sweetheart, yes, if you're choosing me." Her voice trembled emotion, thickening every word. "I'm choosing you, too." Daisy launched herself into Elena's arms, hugging her with all the fierce love a 4-year-old could muster. Elena held her tightly, tears warm against her cheeks. Theo approached, voice low and full. "Elena." She looked up Daisy, still in her arms. He didn't say anything poetic or grand. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. "I'm choosing you, too. And this time, I won't run." He placed a hand gently over Elena's where she held Daisy, 3 hands layered together. 3 lives beginning to weave. The moment held, warm, quiet, certain. Epilogue. The morning after. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window of Theo's small apartment, warming the scent of pancakes sizzling lightly on the stove. Daisy sat at the table, kicking her feet happily as she colored with a new set of crayons. Elena moved around the kitchen with an ease that made Theo pause now and then just to watch her. She giggled at Daisy's singing, nudged Theo's arm when he burned the edge of a pancake, and hummed cheerfully each time Daisy shouted, "Mommy, look." That word didn't scare Elena anymore. It didn't scare Theo either. A soft knock sounded at the door. Margaret stepped inside, her winter coat dusted with frost. She froze when she saw the scene: Daisy at the table, Elena pouring warm syrup, Theo flipping pancakes with a messy confidence. A family. Daisy ran to her grandmother. "Grandma, Mommy's making pancakes." Margaret's breath caught. Then, slowly, she approached Elena, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her voice softened into something full and sincere. "Welcome to the family." Elena smiled through tears she didn't bother hiding. Theo watched them, warmth swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, the house felt like it was breathing again, alive, joyful, anchored. There are families born from blood, families built from vows, and then there are families sown from wounds and courage from found moments and steady love. Daisy looked up at Elena, her smile bright enough to melt winter. And Elena whispered the quiet truth that had changed all their lives: "I'm not going anywhere." And that is the end of tonight's story. A story about love found in unexpected places, about second chances, and about the kind of family that isn't born from perfection, but from courage, compassion, and choosing one another day after day. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Sometimes the people meant to heal us aren't the ones we were searching for. They're the ones who simply refuse to leave. Sometimes family is the hand that reaches for you in the dark and says, "You don't have to walk through this alone." And sometimes the smallest voice, the quietest question, "Will you stay?" can change an entire lifetime. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? A moment when love showed up in a way you didn't expect through a child, a stranger, a friend, or even a second chance you didn't think you deserved. Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it today. And tell me, where are you watching from? I love seeing this community come together from all around the world. If you enjoyed this story and you want more healing, heartfelt storytelling like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you truly for spending your precious time with this story. Your support is the reason these moments of warmth, hope, and connection continue to exist. Until the next story. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and never stop believing in the quiet miracles life still holds.